It was a hot, dusty afternoon in a little town called Dustyville. The streets were super quiet, way too quiet, some people might say. The sun was burning bright, making the road shimmer like a hot frying pan. Everything was calm, peaceful, almost boring. But then, out of nowhere, a loud, rumbling noise broke the silence. It sounded like thunder, but it wasn't. It was the sound of big, shiny motorcycles roaring into town. A gang of bikers rolled in, acting like they owned the whole place. They wore black leather jackets that looked tough and cool, and their loud laughs echoed down the empty street. The leader of the gang was a guy named Spike. Spike was the loudest, the meanest, and the proudest of them all. He had spiky hair that stuck up like a porcupine, and shiny black boots that clicked on the ground when he walked. Spike loved showing off, especially to people he thought were weak or not important. As the bikers rode down the street, their engines growled like angry dogs. People peeked out of their windows, scared, but no one dared to come outside. The bikers were trouble, and everyone in Dustyville knew it. They stopped their bikes right in the middle of the road, kicking up clouds of dust that floated in the air. Spike looked around, grinning, like a king looking over his kingdom. And that's when they saw him. Sitting all alone on the curb, with his head down, was an old homeless man named Joe. Joe didn't look like much. His clothes were old and torn, with big holes in his shirt and pants. His face was hidden under a scruffy, messy beard, and his hair was long and tangled, sticking out in all directions. Next to him was a rusty shopping cart, the kind you see at grocery stores, but this one was full of empty soda cans, a few plastic bottles, and a dirty, tattered blanket. Joe's shoes were so worn out, you could see his toes peeking through the holes in the front. To the bikers, Joe looked like nothing. Just a poor, helpless man who didn't matter. To them, he was the perfect person to pick on, someone they could tease and bully without any trouble. Spike smirked, his eyes narrowing as he stared at Joe. He revved his motorcycle engine really loud, vroom, vroom, so loud that it made Joe jump a little. "Hey, old man!" Spike shouted, his voice full of meanness. "What's a dirty guy like you doing in our town? Don't you know this is our street? People like you don't belong here." The other bikers laughed, their voices sharp and cruel, like a pack of hyenas circling a lonely animal. They rode their bikes in a big circle around Joe, making the dust fly up and cover him in a cloud of dirt. Joe didn't say a word. He just sat there, his head still down, his hands holding tight to his rusty cart. He looked small, weak, like someone who couldn't fight back. The bikers thought he was scared, maybe even crying under all that scruffy hair. But if you looked really, really closely, closer than the bikers ever would, you might have noticed something strange. Something different. Joe's hands weren't shaking. They weren't trembling or moving at all. They were steady, strong, like the hands of someone who wasn't afraid. And his eyes, hidden under that messy hair, weren't scared either. They were sharp, like the eyes of a hawk, watching everything, waiting for the right moment. But the bikers didn't see any of that. They were too busy laughing, pointing, and being mean. One of the bikers, a skinny guy named Rat, jumped off his bike and ran over to Joe's cart. "Look at this guy!" Rat yelled, his voice high and squeaky. "Bet he hasn't eaten in weeks. Look at all this junk he's got, cans, bottles, trash. Maybe we should help him out by taking his precious cans." The gang roared with laughter as Rat grabbed a handful of empty soda cans from Joe's cart and threw them into the street. The cans clattered and rolled, making a loud noise that echoed down the road. Another biker, a big, heavy guy named Tank, cracked his knuckles, making a loud pop, pop, pop sound. "Yeah, let's teach this old guy a lesson," Tank said, his voice deep and scary. "He needs to know who's boss around here." The bikers cheered, their engines roaring even louder, like a thunderstorm rolling in. Spike leaned closer to Joe, his shiny boots crunching on the gravel. He bent down, getting right in Joe's face, so close that Joe could smell the leather of Spike's jacket. "You're nothing, old man," Spike said, his voice low and mean, like a snake hissing. "Just garbage on the side of the road. Remember that. Nobody cares about you. Nobody's gonna help you." The bikers laughed again, their voices loud and cruel, filling the air with noise. They threw more cans, kicked dirt at Joe, and made fun of his torn clothes and broken shoes. To them, Joe was just a joke, someone weak and helpless, someone they could push around without any trouble. They thought they were so big, so strong, so powerful. But here's the thing, Spike and his gang had no idea who they were messing with. Joe wasn't just some helpless homeless man. Oh no. He had a secret. A big, huge, amazing secret. And soon, very soon, the bikers were going to wish they had never even looked at him. They were going to wish they had just ridden their bikes right out of town and left Joe alone. What do you think, folks? Is Joe really as helpless as he seems? Or is there something more to this quiet man sitting on the curb? Is he hiding something big, something strong, something that will surprise everyone? Stick around, because the story is just getting started, and it's going to get wild. The sun was starting to set in Dustyville, turning the sky a bright orange, like a big, juicy orange in the sky. The air was getting cooler, but the bikers weren't done with Joe. Not even close. They were having too much fun being mean, and they weren't going to stop anytime soon. Spike, the leader of the gang, loved having people watch him. To him, the empty street was like a big stage, and he was the star of the show. Spike jumped off his shiny motorcycle, his heavy black boots crunching on the gravel as he landed. He walked over to Joe, moving his hips like he was the coolest guy in the world. "Hey, old man," Spike said, kicking a tiny pebble at Joe's rusty shopping cart. The pebble hit the cart with a little ping sound, making it wobble. "You didn't answer me. Don't you know who I am? I'm Spike, the king of this town. And you? You're just dirt under my boots. Dirty, smelly dirt." The other bikers cheered, clapping their hands and yelling, "Yeah, Spike. Show him. Show him who's boss." They loved watching Spike act tough, and they wanted him to keep going. Rat, the skinny biker with a squeaky voice, grabbed another handful of Joe's empty soda cans from the cart. He held them up high, grinning like a naughty kid, and then started juggling them in the air. "Look at me!" Rat shouted, laughing as the cans fell to the ground with loud clank, clank, clank noises. "This guy's junk is so funny. What a loser." Another biker, a big, heavy guy named Tank, cracked his knuckles, making a loud pop, pop, pop sound, like popcorn popping in a pen. Tank was huge, with arms as thick as tree branches, and he loved scaring people. "Maybe we should teach this guy a lesson, huh, Spike?" Tank said, grinning with big, yellow teeth. "Show him what happens to people who don't respect us. Show him who's really in charge around here." Joe still didn't say a word. He just sat there on the curb, his head down, his hands resting on his cart. He looked small, weak, like someone who couldn't fight back at all. The bikers thought he was scared, maybe even shaking in his torn-up shoes. But here's the thing, those hands of Joe's, oh, those hands told a different story. They weren't the shaky, weak hands of a scared old man. They were steady, like a rock sitting still in a river. They were strong, like the hands of someone who knew how to handle trouble. And if you looked really, really close, closer than the bikers ever would, you might have seen something strange on Joe's knuckles. Scars. Little white lines crisscrossing his skin. Scars that looked like they came from fights. A lot of fights. But the bikers didn't notice any of that. They were too busy showing off, laughing, and being mean. Spike leaned in close, his face just inches from Joe's. His breath smelled like gasoline and chewing gum, and his eyes were full of meanness. "What's wrong, old man?" Spike said, his voice loud and cruel. "Too scared to talk? Or maybe you're just too stupid to know what's good for you." He laughed, and the other bikers joined in, their voices bouncing off the empty buildings and echoing down the quiet street. Then, Spike did something really, really mean. He reached into Joe's cart, digging around in the pile of cans and bottles, and pulled out Joe's tattered blanket. That blanket was old and dirty, with holes all over it, but it was the only thing Joe had to keep warm at night. It was his most important thing, the thing that kept him from shivering when the cold wind blew. Spike held the blanket up high, waving it around like a flag, and then splash, he threw it into a muddy puddle on the side of the road. The blanket landed with a wet plop, soaking up all the dirty water. "Oops," Spike said, pretending it was an accident. "Guess you'll be cold tonight, huh, old man? Too bad." The bikers roared with laughter, holding their stomachs and pointing at Joe. They thought it was the funniest thing in the world, watching Joe's blanket sink into the mud. But Joe didn't flinch. He didn't cry or yell or even move. He just looked at the blanket, his sharp eyes watching it sink, and then he looked back at Spike. And for the first time, Joe spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, like rocks tumbling down a hill. "You shouldn't have done that," Joe said, his words slow and heavy, like a warning. Spike blinked, surprised. He wasn't expecting Joe to talk at all. For a second, he looked confused, like he didn't know what to say. But then he laughed even harder, throwing his head back and howling like a wolf. "Oh, look!" Spike shouted, pointing at Joe. "The old man talks? What are you gonna do about it, huh? Cry? Run away? Boo-hoo!" The bikers howled with laughter, slapping their knees and cheering, but Joe just stared at Spike. And if you were paying attention, really paying attention, you might have noticed something in Joe's eyes. Something dangerous. Something that said, "You're about to regret this." But Spike didn't see it. He was too busy being the big, tough guy, showing off for his gang. He turned to the other bikers, grinning wide, his spiky hair bouncing as he moved. "Come on, boys!" Spike yelled, raising his fist in the air. "Let's give this loser a real lesson. Maybe a black eye to match his dirty face. Let's show him what happens when you mess with Spike and his crew." The bikers cheered, their voices loud and scary, like a pack of wild dogs barking at the moon. They closed in around Joe, their shadows falling over him like a big, dark cloud. Tank cracked his knuckles again, Rat giggled like a naughty kid, and Spike smirked, thinking he was the toughest guy in the world. Things were looking bad, really, really bad. It looked like Joe was in big trouble, like he couldn't possibly get out of this mess. But here's the thing, Joe wasn't scared. Not even a little bit. Because Joe had a secret. A secret so big, so huge, it was about to turn this whole scene upside down. The bikers thought they were the strong ones, the tough ones, the ones in charge. But they were wrong. Very, very wrong. What do you think, folks? Is Joe in real trouble, or is he hiding something huge? Is he really as weak as he looks, or is there something special about this quiet man on the curb? Stick around, because the next part is going to blow your mind. The bikers tightened their circle around Joe, their big boots kicking up clouds of dust that floated in the air. The street was dark now, with only a little orange light left in the sky, but the bikers didn't care. They were too busy being mean, and they were having too much fun to stop. Spike cracked his knuckles, making a loud pop, pop, pop sound, like firecrackers going off. He grinned wide, his teeth shining in the dim light, like a wolf about to jump on a little rabbit. "Time to teach you some manners, old man," Spike said, his voice full of meanness. "You're gonna wish you never met us." Tank, the big, heavy biker, laughed deep in his belly, a loud, rumbling laugh that shook the air. He stepped forward, his huge hands grabbing Joe's rusty shopping cart. With one big push, Tank tipped the cart over, making it fall to the ground with a loud crash. All of Joe's things, his empty soda cans, his plastic bottles, his broken bits of junk, spilled out onto the street, rolling everywhere. Rat, the skinny biker, giggled like a naughty kid and ran over, kicking the cans like they were soccer balls. "Goal!" Rat shouted, laughing as the cans flew into the air and landed far away. "Look at all this trash. What a loser." Joe still didn't move. He just sat there on the curb, watching everything happen. He looked small, weak, like someone who couldn't do anything to stop the bikers. But now, something was different. Something was changing. Joe's hands, those steady, scarred hands, slowly curled into fists. Not scared fists, the kind you make when you're afraid. No, these were fighting fists, the kind you make when you're ready for trouble. And if you listened really, really closely, closer than the bikers ever would, you might have heard Joe mutter something under his breath. Something quiet, something low, something like, "Last chance." But the bikers didn't hear it. They were too busy being mean, laughing, and showing off. Spike stepped closer, his shiny boots crunching on the gravel. He reached down and grabbed Joe by the collar of his torn, dirty jacket, yanking him up to his feet with one big pull. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, old man," Spike shouted, his face red with anger, his eyes full of fire. Joe's head lifted, and for the first time, The bikers got a good look at his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a scared, helpless man. Oh no. They were sharp, like the eyes of a hawk flying high in the sky, watching everything below. They were fierce, like the eyes of a lion waiting to pounce. Spike blinked, his grin fading for just a second. Something about Joe's eyes made him feel unsure. Like maybe, just maybe, he had made a big mistake. But Spike couldn't back down now, not in front of his gang. He had to act tough, even if he felt a tiny bit scared inside. So he laughed, a loud, fake laugh, trying to sound strong. "What's with the tough guy look, huh?" Spike said, his voice loud but shaky. "You think you're scary? You think you're strong? You're nothing. Just a dirty old man with a pile of junk." Joe's lips curled into a tiny, almost invisible smile. It wasn't a happy smile, the kind you give to a friend. No, it was a dangerous smile, the kind that says, you don't know what's coming. Then Joe spoke, his voice calm but heavy, like a big, dark cloud ready to burst with rain. "You sure about that?" he said, his words slow and strong, like rocks falling down a hill. The bikers froze. Something about Joe's voice made their laughter stop, like someone had turned off a radio. It was quiet now, so quiet you could hear the wind blowing through the empty street. Spike tried to laugh it off, but his laugh sounded fake, even to him. "Oh, big talk from a nobody," Spike said, shoving Joe backward with both hands. Joe stumbled, his feet sliding on the gravel, but he didn't fall. Instead, he straightened up, standing taller than before, his shoulders square, his head high. And here's where things got really, really interesting. As Joe stood up, his torn jacket shifted, moving just a little to the side. And under that jacket, hidden from the biker's eyes, there was something shiny. Something metal. Something that looked like a badge. Not a police badge, the kind you see on a cop's uniform, but something else. Something old, scratched, and official looking, like it belonged to someone important, someone strong. The bikers didn't notice not yet, but it was there, glinting in the last bits of orange sunlight, shining like a secret waiting to be told. Spike, still trying to act tough, raised his fist, ready to hit Joe. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Spike shouted, his face red and sweaty. "I'll show you what happens to people who don't know their place." He swung his fist at Joe, fast and hard, thinking he would knock Joe down with one punch. But here's the thing, Joe didn't just take the hit. Oh no. In a flash, faster than anyone expected, Joe's hand shot up, catching Spike's fist right in the air, like catching a fly buzzing around your head. The bikers gasped, their mouths hanging open. Spike's eyes widened, his tough guy act falling apart like a house of cards. Joe's grip was like iron, strong and tight, and Spike couldn't pull his hand free, no matter how hard he tried. He pulled and tugged, his face turning redder and redder, but Joe's hand didn't budge. "You really shouldn't have done that," Joe said again, his voice low and dangerous, like thunder rolling in the distance. And then, with a quick flick of his wrist, Joe twisted Spike's arm, forcing him down to his knees. Spike yelped in pain, a loud, squeaky yelp, like a puppy who stepped on a thorn. His face turned bright red, and his spiky hair bounced as he fell. The other bikers stepped back, their boots shuffling on the gravel, suddenly not so sure of themselves. Rat, the skinny one, tried to sound brave, his squeaky voice shaking. "Hey, let him go, you crazy old man," Rat shouted, pointing a shaky finger at Joe. "You don't know who you're messing with. We're tough. We're strong." But Joe just looked at him, his hawk-like eyes pinning Rat in place, like a teacher staring down a naughty kid. "Funny," Joe said, his voice calm but strong. "I was about to say the same thing to you. What do you think, folks? Who is Joe, really? What's that shiny badge under his jacket? Is he just a homeless man, or is he something more, something big, something strong? And what's he going to do next? Stick around, because the big moment is coming up, and it's going to be huge." The street was dead quiet now, like the whole town was holding its breath. The only sound was Spike's grunts of pain as he knelt in the dirt, his arm still twisted tight in Joe's strong grip. Spike's face was red, his spiky hair messy, and his tough guy act was falling apart fast. The other bikers stood frozen, their boots stuck to the ground, their mouths hanging open. All their laughing, all their meanness, all their tough guy attitudes were melting away, like ice cream on a hot day. Joe's eyes moved over the gang, sharp and strong, like a lion staring down a pack of scared hyenas. "You boys think you're tough," Joe said, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. "You think picking on someone weaker makes you strong. You think pushing people around makes you big. But you picked the wrong guy today. You picked the wrong guy to mess with." His words were slow, heavy, like big rocks falling into a deep pond, making ripples that everyone could feel. With his free hand, the one not holding Spike's arm, Joe reached under his torn, dirty jacket. His fingers moved slow, steady, like he had all the time in the world. He pulled out the shiny metal thing, the badge. He held it up high, letting it catch the last bits of orange light from the setting sun. The badge glowed, shining bright, and the bikers squinted, trying to see it better. Their eyes got wide, bigger than ever, as they read the words scratched into the metal: "Special Forces Retired." Tank, the big, heavy biker, gulped, his throat making a loud glug sound. His big hands shook a little, and his yellow teeth chattered. Special Forces." Tank stammered, his deep voice suddenly high and squeaky, like a scared kid. "You mean, like, the army guys? The ones who fight wars and stuff? The ones who are super strong and super tough?" Joe's smile grew, but it wasn't a friendly smile, the kind you give to a friend. No, it was a dangerous smile, the kind that says, "You're in big trouble now." It was the smile of a man who had seen things, scary things, hard things, dangerous things that these bikers couldn't even imagine in their wildest dreams. "Not just any army guys," Joe said, his voice calm but strong, like a big, tall tree standing still in a storm. "The kind who take down gangs like yours without even breaking a sweat. The kind who stop bad guys like you every single day." Spike, still on his knees, tried to laugh, but it came out as a weak, shaky whimper, like a puppy whining for its mom. "You're lying," Spike said, his voice cracking, his face pale. "You're just a dirty old homeless guy. You can't be." But before Spike could finish, Joe let go of his arm and moved. And when I say moved, I mean moved. In a blur, faster than anyone could follow, faster than a race car zooming down a track, Joe spun around, his torn jacket flapping like a cape. He grabbed Rat, the skinny biker, by the collar of his leather jacket and lifted him off the ground with just one hand. Rat squeaked, a loud, high squeak, like a mouse caught in a trap. His skinny legs kicked in the air, swinging back and forth, but Joe held him up high, strong and steady, like lifting a feather. Tank, the big guy, roared like a bear, his face red with anger. "Let him go!" Tank shouted, charging at Joe with his huge fists raised, ready to smash anything in his way. But Joe didn't even blink. He sidestepped, smooth as a dancer, quick as a cat, and Tank missed him completely. Tank's big body kept going, like a runaway train, and he crashed into a pile of garbage cans on the side of the street. Bang! Crash! Clatter! The cans fell all over, rolling everywhere, and Tank groaned, stuck in the pile, his big boots sticking up in the air. The last biker, a quiet guy named Buzz, who hadn't said much the whole time, dropped his tough act right then and there. His eyes were wide, his face pale, and he turned around and ran, his boots pounding on the ground, disappearing down the dark street as fast as his legs could carry him. Joe didn't chase him. He didn't need to. The message was clear, Joe was in charge now, and the bikers were done. Joe turned back to Spike, who was still on his knees, clutching his sore arm, his spiky hair flopping over his sweaty face. Joe stepped closer, his shadow falling over Spike like a big, dark cloud. "Here's the deal," Joe said, his voice calm but firm, like a teacher telling a naughty kid the rules. "You and your gang are done in this town. Done picking on people. Done being mean. Done acting tough. You don't come back here. You don't bother anyone else. And if I hear even a whisper, just a tiny little whisper, that you've been picking on people again, I'll find you. And next time, I won't be so nice. Next time, you'll wish you never met me." Spike nodded, his head bobbing up and down fast, like a toy on a spring. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and his tough guy act was gone, gone, gone. Okay, Spike said, his voice shaky and scared. "We're gone. We're leaving. Just don't hurt us. Please. Joe stepped back, his sharp eyes watching Spike closely. Spike scrambled to his feet, tripping over himself in his hurry to get away. The bikers didn't waste a second. They grabbed their shiny motorcycles, their hands shaking, their boots slipping on the gravel. The engines roared to life, loud and rumbling, vroom, vroom, vroom. And they sped out of town, their leather jackets flapping in the wind, their tough guy act shattered into a million pieces. The street was quiet again, the dust settling back down, the orange sky fading to dark. Joe stood alone, his torn jacket hanging loose, his badge still shining in his hand. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was a hero, a warrior, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to show who he really was. What do you think, folks? Did you see that coming? Did you guess Joe's big secret? Joe wasn't just a homeless man, he was a hero, a warrior, a special forces soldier who fought for what's right. But the story's not over yet. Stick around to see what happens next, because there's more to come. The dust settled on the empty street, like a big cloud falling back to the ground. The loud roar of the bikers' engines faded away, getting quieter and quieter, until it was gone completely. The street was silent again, just like it was before the bikers came. Joe stood alone, his torn, dirty jacket fluttering in the evening breeze, like a flag waving gently in the wind. He looked down at his spilled cans, his broken bottles, and his tipped-over cart, all scattered on the ground. He sighed, a long, slow sigh, like someone who had a lot on his mind. Then, with slow, careful movements, he started picking up his things, one can at a time, one bottle at a time, putting them back where they belonged. Joe moved quietly, his steady hands working fast, even though his cart was broken and his things were dirty. He didn't look angry or sad, just calm, like someone who was used to fixing things, used to making do with what he had. But he wasn't alone for long. From the shadows of the nearby diner, a little building with bright lights and the smell of hamburgers, a few townspeople stepped out. They had been watching the whole thing, hiding behind windows and doors, too scared to step in before. But now, after seeing what Joe did, they saw him in a new way, like seeing the sun come out after a big, dark storm. A young woman named Sarah, who worked at the diner, ran over with a broom in her hands. Her shoes clicked on the pavement, and her apron bounced as she hurried to Joe's side. "Here, let me help," Sarah said, her voice soft, like a whisper on the wind. She started sweeping the dirt away from Joe's cans, making a little pile so he could pick them up easier. Joe looked up, his sharp eyes blinking in surprise. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like rocks tumbling down a hill. "I can do it myself. I'm used to it." Sarah smiled, a big, warm smile, the kind that makes you feel safe. "I want to," she said, sweeping faster. "What you did back there, it was amazing. Those bikers have been terrorizing this town for months, scaring everyone, breaking things, being mean. We thought no one could stop them. We thought they'd always be trouble. But you did. You stopped them, all by yourself." Joe didn't say anything at first. He just kept picking up his cans, one by one, putting them back in his broken cart. But his sharp eyes softened a little, like ice melting in the sun. He looked at Sarah, then at the ground, then back at Sarah again. "I just did what I had to," he said, his voice quiet but strong. "That's all." But Sarah wasn't the only one who came to help. An old man named Mr. Thompson, who owned the hardware store down the street, stepped forward, holding Joe's muddy blanket in his hands. The blanket was wet and dirty, dripping with puddle water, but Mr. Thompson held it carefully, like it was something important. "I saw the whole thing," Mr. Thompson said, his voice shaky but kind, like a grandpa telling a story. "I saw how you stood up to those bikers, how you made them run away. You're not just some homeless guy, are you? You're a hero. A real, true hero." Joe shrugged, his shoulders moving up and down, like he didn't think it was a big deal. "I'm just a guy trying to get by," he said, taking the muddy blanket from Mr. Thompson. "But I couldn't let them keep hurting people. Not on my watch. Not in this town." More people came out now, stepping out of the diner, the hardware store, the little shops lining the street. There was a lady who worked at the bakery, a man who fixed cars, a kid who delivered newspapers on his bike. They all looked at Joe, their eyes wide, their mouths smiling, like they were seeing him for the first time. They whispered to each other, pointing and nodding, saying things like, "That's the guy who stopped the bikers, and he's so brave, and who is he, really?" Word spread fast in Dustyville, like a wildfire jumping from tree to tree. By the next morning, everyone in town knew about the mysterious homeless man who had taken down Spike's gang. People started leaving things by Joe's spot on the curb, little gifts to say thank you. There was a big loaf of fresh bread from the bakery, still warm and soft. There was a pair of new socks, clean and dry, from the clothing store. There was even a few dollars, folded up tight, left by someone who wanted to help. The diner offered Joe free meals, hot and delicious, whenever he wanted. And Mr. Thompson, the hardware store man, brought Joe a brand new cart, shiny and strong, with big wheels that wouldn't break, even on the bumpy streets. "Thank you," Joe said, his voice quiet, his sharp eyes looking at all the people around him. "But you don't have to do this. I'm fine. I've always been fine." Sarah, the diner lady, shook her head, her apron flapping as she moved. "No, Joe," she said, her voice firm but kind. "You're not just fine. You're amazing. And we want to help you, just like you helped us. That's what neighbors do. That's what friends do." Joe didn't say anything, but his sharp eyes softened even more, like a storm cloud turning into a sunny sky. He nodded, just a little, and took the new cart, the bread, the socks, the dollars. He stayed in Dustyville, still quiet, still humble, still sitting on his curb, but now with a little more respect from the people around him. People waved when they passed by, smiled when they saw him, said hello when they walked their dogs. Joe wasn't just the homeless man anymore. He was Joe, the hero, the man who made the town safe again. And as for the bikers, they never came back. Not even once. Some people say they left the state entirely, riding their shiny motorcycles far, far away, too scared to ever cross paths with Joe again. Some say they gave up being mean, gave up being bullies, because they knew Joe would find them if they didn't. The town was quiet now, peaceful now, safe now, all because of one man who looked weak but was stronger than anyone could imagine. And there you have it, folks, the story of Joe, the homeless man who turned out to be so much more. Sometimes, the people we overlook, the ones we think are weak or unimportant, are the strongest of all. Joe taught the bikers a lesson, sure, but he also taught us something bigger: never judge a book by its cover. The quiet ones, the underdogs, the people who seem down on their luck, they might just be the heroes we need. So, next time you see someone being picked on, or someone who looks like they need help, remember Joe. Stand up. Speak out. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be part of a story worth telling. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you loved this story, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Drop a comment below, where are you watching from today, and what's one lesson you'll take away from Joe's story. Until next time, keep being kind, keep being brave, and I'll see you in the next video.